And I will just actually jump right into it. So hello, everyone. Welcome. And thank you for joining today. My name is Ruth Uni, and I'll be walking us through this noon hour presentation. So you'll get to enjoy your lunch at least a little bit while we're stepping through this. This is about building up your change management toolkit. And so what I'll be doing is through this is just exploring some tools that are part of the change management world, part of project management and business analysis world, connecting those tools to things that you might be already using. So just as a way to explore them maybe from a slightly different perspective. And then also allowing you to connect what the tools that you have right now and you, because you're the best and most versatile tool in your toolkit, to the practice that you currently have for managing change in your workplace. So I mentioned my name is Ruth Uni. I'm an instructor here at MacEwan University, and I teach in some of the leadership courses, in particular some of these change management courses. So the things that I'm introducing to you today are part of those courses, so they're pulled from those courses. And just as a side note, those courses are based on materials from John Cotter and William Bridges, sort of the grandfather gurus of organizational change management, as well as based on the material from the change management, the CM body of knowledge, which is published by the Association of Change Management Professionals. So let me move on, and I'll just start to talk about the words sometimes that we use around tools and toolkits. And I use words sometimes interchangeably, and I know that I shouldn't. English is important, not always forgiving when it's written, definitely forgiving when it's spoken, but it still becomes very important. And one of the tools actually that you have in your toolkit is the words that we use. So starting with the terminology and the definition. So when I think about a toolbox, I think about something like my garden shed. In my garden shed, I have a shovel and I have a little rake and a little hand scraper. I have this weird 3-pronged rake that I inherited from someone. I store things in my toolbox. And so some of those are dated. I'm not even sure if some of them actually work. My toolkit, on the other hand, is something that I keep accessible. And I have it on me, basically in my back pocket. I'm familiar with the tools that are in there, and I'm skilled at them. I have different toolkits, so I wear different hats. Sometimes I'm fulfilling the role of a project manager. Sometimes it's a change manager. Sometimes it's a business analyst. Sometimes it's an instructor. And so I have different tools, I have different toolkits to build those out. Within each one of those toolkits, I have tools, though some of those are transferable. Now, those toolkits being different, I still recognize that every project manager fulfilling that role of a change manager, we have toolkits, and we might have similar tools, but still my toolkit is my toolkit. And that's what you want to think about is, so whatever you have is right for you. So it's not like there's one right toolkit or absolutely have to have all of this. It depends on you and how you are going about your particular work. So I also just want to mention I want to distinguish between techniques and tools. Some of what I'm going to be talking about today is techniques, related to techniques. How do you do something? How would you do a SWOT analysis? I'm trying to focus today, but you'll catch me out, I'm sure, because I'm trying to talk today just about tools. And so that, again, focus on what are the different things that we have to hand. So whether that's favorite icebreakers or racy charts or things like that. So toolbox versus toolkit. We're focusing on toolkit because that's what I have to do my work that's right now. And it's full of handy tools that I'm very familiar with. So this is just a stop in a teeny tiny reflective moment because I see there's lots of people that are logged on. I'm interested, if you're doing change management right now, what do you consider as the number one tool in your change management toolkit? So please feel free to put something in the chat and say, this is what I like to use, or this is what I like to use. With these webinars, I always think these are fun because you have the opportunity to see what other people are saying and what other folks are learning. So I welcome you to please do that. And I'm just going to keep talking as I go through with this. So when I talk about what's number one in my change management toolkit, I have lots of things, as I mentioned. And I typically, I look to something like a problem statement. I have all the different kinds of checklists, entry and exit checklists. I have, here's my lessons learned at the end of the day. Did I do everything that I needed to do? Is it a check off? I have icebreakers. I think of icebreakers as being tools that I have, because is it an icebreaker? Is it an energizer? What do I have that will help engage my stakeholders? What do I have that will help me collaborate or communicate with my stakeholders? So I don't, it's not like I just got the flyer actually from Canadian Tire, and there was this multi-tool in there, and it was a hammer and with a wrench, and I think there was pliers, and I think there was a file, and there was like 3 other things with it. So the tools that are in my toolkit, I just want to mention, they're not multi-tools like what you could buy at Canadian Tire. These are singular tools, but I can use them for different purposes. So there's just something to think about. So again, other items I think about sometimes are RACI charts. I think about impact surveys or performance measures. I think about empathy maps. So there's lots of, oops, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself there. I was just looking at what's in the chat. Oh, okay, please use the Q&A. Effective communications, absolutely agree with that, Katrina. If I want to make sure that I'm able to connect with people as I'm working through. So change management fundamentally comes back to there's a level of engagement which requires some sort of interaction, and then the collaboration and the communication that goes forward. And just thinking as well about, oh, I like the curiosity one too, asking questions, because we talk about that. One other thing to think about with change management tools, again, when you're looking at what do you have for tools, is also look to your organization, because oftentimes there's great tools that have been created that have your organization has, maybe it's in a different department, but they might be useful to you. So those can be things like charts for collecting information. Maybe they have a standard survey with a little bit of tailoring. Maybe that's something that you could use, that you could put to use. So your change management toolkit, there's lots of options for you there. All right, so how do you choose the right tool? Well, my first point, I should have made this the first point, is there is no one right tool. There's many ways to get to the place that you want to get to. So how you choose to do that is going to depend on that situation, on those stakeholders. So whatever the changes that you're working on. So some tools you can use throughout a change, and some tools align better with certain stages. So when I'm talking about stages, I'm referencing here from William Bridges. He talks about transition, and he recognizes 3 stages of transition. So we talk about endings, where it's like, I'm saying goodbye, I don't know what the new world is. I'm in a neutral zone. Okay, I accept the fact that, this work that I've done for the last 8 years that you pay me well and bonuses for, I'm not doing anymore. And then the new beginning stage, which is, oh, I'm excited. We get to go somewhere else. So that's good for me. So those are the stages when I'm talking about stages. So some of these tools work better in certain stages. Doesn't mean that you can't use them in other stages. Remember too, as part of the change that you're working on, you're going from a current state that people know and are familiar and comfortable with to a future state that has a lot of unknowns with them. And you're being that bridging role. So going back to the comment about communication, that becomes critical coming through all of here. Also to consider is timing. You may be working on a change that will happen next year. So maybe you're putting together a business case for mergers and acquisition. It's a department. Departments are going to come together next year. So you need to be thinking about that. Some tools that may be too far in the future for you may not be as useful for you. So something like a sustainment plan, for example, that's pretty far. There's a lot of variables. There's a lot of change that can happen in that meantime. And then again, just to go back to that one point, you're always looking to tailor the tools. It was John Cotter. I saw a video once of John Cotter, and he was talking about, if you've seen one change, you've seen one change. Very serious voice. And it's like, that's so true. So again, one project that I was working on as part of the change management responsibilities, we were rolling out software to a number of locations around the province. It was the same software. It wasn't a big piece of software, but in essence, it was the same things that we had to do, same training that we had to do. But every one of the offices that we were rolling this out to was different. There was a different number of people. They had different levels of experience with the work itself. So we had to tailor for those locations, and not a lot, doesn't take a lot of tailoring. So we're not talking time intensive here, but that ultimately contributed to the success of what we were doing. So choosing the right tool, it's you looking in your toolkit, being familiar with what you've got, and then it's not so much about the right tool as just starting to step forward. And then kind of the last point, just want to make, and I'll say it again, you always think about you are the most versatile and useful tool in your toolkit, because it's your skill set that's pulling all these together, and it's your hands and your brain that is shaping the change so that you can move forward and be successful. And I should have mentioned, if you have questions as we go through or any kind of comments, then please do, I guess if we're putting it in the question and answer, do share, because I think, like I say, that's one of the great things about webinars is we have this opportunity to have some discussion, and you can find out what other people think and see about things. So I'm going to talk about 6 things, well, really 5, and then I'm going to talk about you. So there's a beginning and sort of the also beginning in the middle. So beginning is the problem statement, stakeholder analysis, thinking about stakeholders, and a sustainment plan, which is really as you move forward and you want to sustain this change, what does that look like? And the last 2 items, so the mind map, sometimes people think about that as more of a technique than a tool. I think of it as a tool. And then a framework, just to help you think about things. All right, so problem statement. If you've seen this, I'd love to have a thumbs up or just a reactions piece. If you've seen or used something like a problem statement before, that's great. I'm happy for that. Because this is a tool, again, it's super simple. It's not elegant. It's not eloquent either. This is you starting off to understand what is the problem, what is the change that we're looking at. I did work in one organization where we were not allowed to have problems. We could only have opportunities. So this would have been an opportunity statement. This is your option. You could tailor this. This could be an opportunity statement. But for me, I always would go back to the problem op. And so I start with, what's the problem? To build this out, number one, I might be talking to my sponsor. I might have looked through a business case. Maybe I interviewed a subject matter expert just to get my initial understanding of what's going on. And I'd also like to say this, I'm starting with from my perspective. If I have the luxury of starting at the beginning of a change, this is going to be the first thing I do. If I'm coming into the change as a change manager person partway through, I'm still going to do this. Just again, because it helps me better understand what the problem is. I can start to articulate what we need to do. I can start to scope what is needed. I create this, and then I'm going to sit down with the sponsor to validate it, walk them through it. That's when I find out sometimes the sponsor sees things a little bit differently from me, or the sponsor says, hey, I didn't even think about that. So just to give a little bit more flesh around this, to fill it out is the problem of, you use 2 to 3 sentences to describe whatever that particular problem is. Again, it's not a lot of words. You're not writing a novel. And then you just list the stakeholders who would be or could be affected by this particular problem. So what's happening right now? So this is about current state. And you're just listing the stakeholders. I believe so, Sean. Absolutely. I believe the slides are available after. And the recording is, I believe, too. And then you're going to go through the impact on each of those stakeholders. So this takes a little bit of work to flesh out. Again, you're not making it eloquent. It's not a deliverable. You're not going to get paid for it. It's a discussion document. The last piece is around the benefits of the solution. So you're not describing the solution. You're talking about how will your world be better. I'm going to use an example because it's fresh in my mind. My real world is a contract management system. So I'm an organization and I'm going to implement a contract management system. The problem that we're facing, why we have to do this, is we're paying our contractors late. And then there's penalties associated with that from our contractors. And the relationships with the contractors are affected. They don't trust us anymore. They don't want to do business because we're not paying them. And I should say, this isn't McEwen. I'm not talking about McEwen. This is Ruth using an example from my work. And finally, there's, just we're not paying our bills on time. So we have additional work that we have to do in the back end to ensure that we've done proper accounting, followed proper accounting principles. So it's more work, it's unhappy people, and it's hitting our bottom line. That's the problem. So if I look at, well, who are the stakeholders? Well, then yes, it's our accounting department. It's the back office staff that I'm looking at. It's all of our contractors. It's potentially the CFO because I'm spending more money. The impact, again, now this is where I can go, and as you'll see, this is a little bit iterative. There's a little bit of analysis as you go through this, is that, so those back office staff are actually doing overtime just to try to get through all of this. And we've lost contracts with specific companies because we didn't pay them. So it starts to become more powerful as a discussion document then, once you start fleshing all of that out. And when you get to the benefits, it's like, you know what, we have stronger relationships. Those back office staff that are doing that additional accounting, guess what? They can work on something else now. So you can see how you've got some benefits. So this problem statement, again, it doesn't take hours and hours to do this. You put this together. This is your understanding first and foremost, and you step it through with the sponsor. Ensure that that you come to common ground, common understanding about it. And then it becomes some of your foundational work as you go forward, moving into your stakeholder analysis. You can use this when you're talking with different business units as well. So it facilitates discussion across sometimes those silos that develop in organizations, because I talk to the back office staff and then I talk to the accounting staff. They don't realize that this problem exists. So that's a problem statement. So it's I say number one, number two, number three. It's not that it's priority, just this is the one that I will start with. So it doesn't mean it's the top of the pops one, just that's the one that I will start with. The second one I just wanted to talk about is the stakeholder analysis. So this is there's two levels to this. There's a high level stakeholder grid that I typically talk about, which is my starting point. And then there's a more detailed analysis, which is more like a table. And I put up in the corner there, you'll see my definition of a stakeholder. And this is an amalgamation of Project Management Institute and the International Institute of Business Analysis and the Change ACMP. Stakeholders are individuals or organizations, entities that are positively or negatively impacted by the change, or that they think that they are, or that you think that they are. So that's a lot of entities that we're talking about. And your job as change management person, your goal, I guess I should say, is to get stakeholders ready, willing, and able to implement a change and to sustain a change. To be effective, you need to understand them. You need to understand the roles that they have on the change as part of the change, how they might view the change, what their expectations are. So there's a two-layer approach to this, because in my mind, you've got so much analysis to do here. So number two. And the stakeholder analysis, again, I do that at the beginning, and it is ultimately going to form a baseline for me. If I'm coming into a change partway through, I'm brought in partway through, I'm expecting that there will be a stakeholder analysis already done. If not, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to do it. I mentioned there's a lot of things to think about. There's lots of things that you're going to analyze. So you're going to look at, there's an impact. How are you changing your stakeholders' world? And when I say you, I mean, how will this change impact all of these different stakeholder groups? Hopefully your problem statement has identified some of that, so you pull that tool kind of forward. It also helps you understand more about the particular stakeholder. What's their competencies? Are they committed? Are they interested? Do they have specific requirements that should be considered as part of what you're doing? And then you're also going to think about what's their influence over this initiative. What are they Are they folks that can change the way things happen? You can also look at where are these people located? So their geography. Are they all within the province of the Alberta? Are they all within this time zone? Are we talking staff that have worked here for 25 years and staff that have worked here for 5 years? This is very much the part where you, as the change manager, start to tailor and say, so what is it that we're going to look at? What do we think is going to be most important for us? So lots of things for you to think about. And as you're looking at this, you'll see that I've put, there's ratings, there's classifications that you have to consider for this. Because as you're going through your analyzing, this information ultimately is going to, I like to think of it as the change charter. It's going to give you some guidance around what techniques and what tactics you might use to engage and communicate and collaborate with your stakeholder. And I start with this. So this is a stakeholder grid. Again, thumbs up or however you can share your reaction if you've used a stakeholder grid before. 2 dimensions. You decide. I typically use influence and impact, but you can use power. You can use competency or commitment, anything like that, capabilities. It's what's important in your world, what you're looking at. So I have the rankings and such that I can lay this out and it's visual. So visuals are great. I showed you like the problem statement itself, it's text because it's just thinking through, I need to get these words down. Those words help you establish that common language that you need to have as you're moving forward with the change. But with this, I just need this. This is another discussion document. That's why I think about this one as a tool, is because I just lay it out. And I'm going to use this potentially with my sponsor and my frontline staff. So just, this is Ruth's arbitrary, my contract management system. I'm implementing this. And so I've laid out some stakeholders and where I think they might land on my stakeholder grid. So senior executives, they have lots of influence because they could pull the plug, they could escalate, accelerate the timeline. I'm not really changing their life though. I have a project manager person that's overseeing this particular project. I have the contractors themselves, right? So the contractors are going to be impacted, absolutely. So this is, as I start to identify my stakeholders, because that's really, I need to understand that first and foremost, then I can lay this out. It's simple. I'm not spending, again, a lot of time on this, but I want to use this as a discussion. And you can, this is one way to engage with stakeholders too, as you ask them, what do they think? So your sponsor might have one opinion, do it again with the frontline staff. How do they view this? They may see this completely different. So this tool provides 2 things to you in the sense of you're able to collect information about people's perspectives on the change, but it also you start to see, how might I need to communicate with these folks? For sure, you do want to check with your sponsor on this and say, does this make sense to you? So you don't want something that is going radically different from what your sponsor is viewing. So that's one purpose for it. So the other one, and the labels are a little bit arbitrary there, but it's what you can consider. And you're more than welcome to change those labels around keep happy and monitor. But those are just sort of general terms around if I have a stakeholder that I'm not changing their world a lot, but they have lots of influence over me, then I want to keep them informed. Maybe I meet with them once a month. Maybe I meet with them every 2 weeks. Maybe it's face-to-face. When I say face-to-face, I mean necessarily online. If I'm monitoring, then that's a much lower touch in terms of what am I doing. Maybe I go and I ask people questions. I just listen when I'm in the elevator going up and down. Could be something as simple as that. Maybe you have a general email where people could send you emails. So I talk about if I've got high impact, I absolutely want to keep those individuals or those entities up to date on what is happening. And especially if they have very little influence over what is going on, I need to communicate with them regularly and thoroughly. And so do I do videos? Do I do phone calls? Do I do town halls? What's the frequency of that? So I can use this grid to help me say, what is my level of interaction? What could it be? when I talk about it from that kind of perspective, this is conceptual. I use this grid without anybody on it, without any of those roles on it. That's another discussion point with the sponsor and with my team, with my core team that we're working with, because change doesn't happen alone. What do we think would be the most effective tactics to work with our business users to help make that change be successful? So that's where this grid as a tool, I find it's got double duty and it's very straightforward, easy for me to use. I can make it really big, I can make it small, I can easy to share. So the stakeholder grid, step one of the analysis. And then once I have that general understanding and agreement, I can do a deeper dive into the different stakeholders. And this is where I would look at different techniques, so being distinguishing techniques. I'm going to interview them, I'm going to survey them, maybe I have some workshops. This is the time-consuming part. You don't want to shortchange yourself here. And sometimes whatever the project schedule, sometimes it does get squished. What's important here is that your information is current and it is accurate and it is firsthand. So it's not they said or they thought or, well, we did that study like 8 months ago and this is what we heard. You want this to reflect what is the current state being right now. You will make decisions based on this information that you've collected about how you will be engaging with stakeholders. That's really subjective, actually. And people are human. And sometimes they say things and they nod their head and they don't really mean yes. They just mean, yeah, you're talking and I'm listening. So as you go through and you make some assessments about your stakeholders, so I'll show you what I mean by that right away, you're still confirming as you go with your sponsor. And does this make sense to you? Does this make sense to you? Does this make sense to you? So there's no surprises from their point of view. I also talk about with stakeholder analysis is be careful with sharing it. Again, assessments are subjective. And if you're wrong, you could do harm to your change initiative and your change efforts, and you don't want to do that. So here's the kind of just an example, again, still building on the contract management system. I have a stakeholder and I would number these. I seriously would number these because it's like, I want to know how many stakeholders am I dealing with? So this is partly estimating. I want to know the stakeholder. I want to know their role on my change. Like, how am I looking at it? I want their contact information. So there's a certain amount where it's stakeholder identification, kind of crosses over into stakeholder register. And then I get into, okay, so what about them? This is the more detailed analysis piece where I've decided for this initiative, I want to understand their level of influence, their level of interest, and from my perspective, how I'm going to impact them. So based on that rating, influence and interest and impact, it's from there that I'm going to classify them. I'm going to classify them where they are right now, a current state, and then where do I need them to be? If I have my manager of accounts payable on my contract management system, I want them to, at minimum, be a supporter. I don't want them to be neutral. I absolutely don't want them to be resistant. So that's my sort of my marching orders, like I was saying, sort of that change charter, like a project charter that directs me around how am I actually going to engage with these folks. So sort of I try to use visuals to skinny things down into something that's like an equation. So I'm trying to blend two worlds all the time. And so this is my formula for stakeholder analysis. So I take the impact, I'm going to change their world. And then what are all the things that are going on in my stakeholder's head? So there's two perspectives there. There's the impact and then all like I say, the interests and the influence and the expectations and the requirements, plus the influence the stakeholder has over this change that I'm working on. And then I'm going to classify them. So this is kind of the part that I think sometimes makes people a little uncomfortable because I'm classifying people. This is like, that's not right. You know, there's stereotypes and all that. You know what? I have to do this. And like I say, I mentioned earlier, it's subjective. So I still have to do it. This is going to give me some direction and some guidance as I go forward. So I'm going to talk about my stakeholders as, are they champions? Rah, rah. Are they supporters? Go. Are they neutral? It's okay. Or are they resistant? Or do they know at all about whatever this initiative is? So that one thing I want to mention, there's a little star there on that classification piece. I have that there because it's simply, that's another area where you can look at from a tool perspective, how are you classifying people? What are your rules for saying someone is a champion? What is the behavior that you want to say this qualifies you as a champion? Because there's this currently, as I mentioned, we talk about the current state piece. This is where we're at right now. It doesn't just stop right there. You're going to be monitoring this as you go forward. So if somebody slips from champion to support, or if they stop coming to every meeting, what does that mean to you? So that's just talking about stakeholder analysis. And it looks so easy, right? But you do have to monitor it. And you know what? Sorry, I did show you that. You have to monitor it throughout. And this is an ongoing, this is a process. So I don't talk about this as a tool. I talk about it as a process. So it supports the tool that is stakeholder analysis. This monitoring depends very much on what the change is. And how long is the change? Is this spanning 6 months? Is this spanning 2 months? What does this look like? How much of a change is it? Does it mean I've got 2 more forms or a form I have to process? Or is it just I have to initial every form? Maybe that's not so bad. How clear is it on what I'm doing? So those levels of uncertainty, there's another grid that you can use where we would talk about the levels of uncertainty. So the Stacy complexity model. And we would look at, does leadership have vision, and do I have certainty over the process or the tools? So those are, if I don't know something, that's a red flag for me in terms of change management. I want to reduce the uncertainty so that I'm able to move forward. Something else you have to think about here too is how will you be monitoring the change? So early on, maybe as your initial baseline, you connected through an employee survey, and, or a survey with your contractors. This is what we're going to do. What do you think about? And then you implement, and you start to implement your contract management system. Maybe you decide, you know what, we think it's better if we interview people. And maybe we do focus groups as we go forward. You have to think about that as you're going through the change, that monitoring piece, because that may require different time and effort that wasn't initially considered as the plan, as part of the change management plan for in total. And so then the last piece is, as you're going through and you're monitoring, you are going to see that, hey, some of these things aren't working because the change will change. You may have to adjust some of those engagement tactics. Maybe you've been communicating too much. I don't think that's possible, but maybe not enough, or maybe just the method, the channel that you're using, there's another way that you could be communicating that would reach a broader audience. So that's your stakeholder analysis. And again, I'm sort of breezing through all this because this is quick. It's just a short time frame. So sustainment plan. If you're using a sustainment plan, love to see that in the chat. That would be great if you are, but I will say that this is one aspect where not so many organizations look at the business case that originally started the change. Let's move forward with this change and compare back the changed world to that business case. So there's 2 things I'm talking about here. So one is, are you realizing the benefits out of your business case, which is kind of a practical question. It's also to know, is your change succeeding? Are you reaching the outcomes that you intended to reach? This, when again, talking about a plan, if I'm wearing my project management hat and you tell me a plan, okay, I'm thinking there's a task and there's a role, there's a responsibility, there's an estimate, there's a milestone, I have a whole bunch of information. Not so much with a sustainment plan. You can choose, again, this is where creativity and you come into play here around, do you do this as a visual? Do you do this as a milestone chart? What is going to be the most effective for you to be able to communicate the success and the progress that you're achieving to your different audiences, to your different stakeholders? And I'm just talking like 3 groups here. So you've got executive staff that want to know that this is happening. Frontline staff, if as you're achieving things, you want people to know that things are moving, that you are progressing, and that you are succeeding. Because again, change doesn't happen with one person. It's a team that will make change happen. So you could use, even if it's a storyboard, even if it's, again, visuals are great here because it's like, look at what we're achieving. Again, balancing that within an organization. So the question, so to answer your question, Trish, you would start this as you start rolling out the change. So you've started moving into that changed world, but then you would continue with this once the project, if I say that, the project has completed. So then you bring in a sustainment plan for the time frame that is most appropriate for the change. So whether that's 3 months or 6 months, depending on whatever it is, 12 months, to see if behavior has changed. Good question. I would say yes. So can a sustainment plan be fluid? I would say yes. So there's a couple things. Post-program, yes, that would work. So you're evaluating the program once it was implemented. Yes, Trish, I would say that works as well. And if you do this once or if you do this twice, again, that's your schedule, your organization, your recognition of when should we do this? How frequently should we do this? So it's not like there's a one-time activity. What I do talk about is that there should be a change owner, because there might be multiple changes that you're doing. So this group has to do this group has to do this group, contract management, I need to put things in on time, I need to sign things. Or are people keeping 2 sets of books? Am I saving things in a different folder? So those change owners may be responsible for different components. And so with a sustainment plan, you may have to look at different elements. Like you might have one end outcome that I want to know if we're paying our bills on time, or our financials are looking better, but there may be other sub elements to that you would like to include in that sustainment plan. So I talk about it as number 3, because again, this is one that we don't do as much. In my experience, organizations, here's my business case, here's my project. There'll be a project final report that talks about here's what we said we were going to do and here's what we did, but it's not always even connected to the business case. So as you go through with this, the piece on the sustainment plan, which is a lot of evaluating change success, you're using those similar techniques that you would have used to stakeholder analysis. Maybe it's interviews or observations or surveys, or a program evaluation piece. It may be performance measures on how people are working. You want to be able to take that information and compare that to your baseline, which is, here's our problem statement where we said we had problems. Do we have a business case as well that we can go back to? You might also need to look at other documents like a project charter, or maybe a strategic or operational plan, to see, have you achieved what you intended to achieve? So a side point with this as well is confirming how you will be reporting these results. So you're going to collect this information. Who are you sharing this with? It should be the change owners. It should be the executive. This might be something new for your sponsor. So you want to make sure that you're introducing this concept of a sustainment plan as a tool early on in your change process. So 2 more things I'm just going to talk about really quickly. Analysis framework. As you're thinking about things throughout all of this, even, the problem statement, you're breaking that down. And if you look at the stakeholder analysis, you're breaking it down. When you look at the sustainment plan, that's really, how long will this take? And what are these dependencies? I use this particular framework. That's kind of a checklist in some ways. People, process, technology, infrastructure. Again, if you've used this before, awesome. I'd love to see happy faces and the reactions, because it lets me group and ensure that I've truly thought about all of these things. Because sometimes I will focus on people, or I will focus on technology, and I won't think about, but how do those 2 intersect? So when I'm talking about people and I'm breaking this down, it's like, do I have an organization chart? Can I see your organization chart? Do I have job descriptions? Are there performance assessments? Is there a balanced scorecard that says this is how people should be doing things? Do you have a RACI chart, or a responsible, accountable, consulted, informed chart that shows how people's responsibilities lie relative to this particular work that we're area that we're focusing on, that we're looking to change. I talk about technology / infrastructure because technology is so embedded into so much of the infrastructure. So thinking about things like key cards, where the security is built into the card itself. And again, there's lots of different questions like, do I actually have the technology? Do people have, and this is where I can start to connect them, do they have the software that they need to do this work? And the process side, again, the tools, the sub pieces, the artifacts that help me understand that. So swim lane diagrams, process models, and whether or not I'm looking at, is there business rules? Are there business policies that I can get access to? Standard operating procedures. I literally will go people, process, technology, infrastructure. So with a process, it's like, oh, who does this? As you're working on a process, or when you're working at implementing a change, you're putting something into an existing system. An organization is a system, so an interconnected set of items. And there's a process that comes before and a process that comes after. So you want to be aware of, as you're fitting this in, there may be other touch points that weren't considered, didn't come out, and you say, wait, this process actually, there's an exception process with that contract management review. There's another group over here that we need to get involved. Here's who those people are. So that's where this analysis framework can come in handy as another tool. Last tool, aside from you, is oh, where are unintended, sorry, I just got your question, Trish. Unintended consequences and evaluate it. I would say, so when we're talking, so unintended consequences, thinking about that from a system thinking perspective. And if I go back to kind of this success, as I'm going through and let me go back to here, as I'm monitoring, as I'm going through, so I should mention any change that I'm working on, I have to look at it as a full picture. So I'm going to do my stakeholder analysis and monitor where the stakeholders are. I might have implemented some technology that has an impact on the stakeholders, that has an impact on other technology, that has an impact on process. So there's another layer of monitoring that goes on, and its intent is to capture those its intent would be to capture any of those unintended consequences. So any of those monitoring activity, that's where I would catch unintended consequences. Does that help, Trish? That's a good question. So much of managing change relates to process. And so you've got different tools that you can use to help you in the process. I also talk about, I need to have a process sort of fundamentally. I need the building blocks so that and this analysis framework is one of those building blocks. I need the building blocks of the framework to know how I can move through that change. No, don't mean to suggest that at all. There's unintended consequences, they can be good, beneficial, they can be perverse, and they can be negative. So not suggesting that they're unintended. So going back to this monitoring, you find something that's unexpected, things are not going the way that they were initially considered that they would go. That's where you will have to adjust what you're doing. The change that you thought you were implementing will change because all those other component pieces are changing. So no, I don't mean to, sorry. Oh, sorry, I'm just reading I flipped up my slide. Yes. There are no negative real through the process that may not be direct. Yeah, so sorry, it's not just about the stakeholders. This is just the tools that the items I'm talking about today. So I've stepped away from talking about the process. There's taking a systems thinking perspective to change is so important, and recognizing that you're fitting in. Here's this current state to this future state, and you think it's just your team, but there's always more involved. There's more individuals, there's more stakeholders, there's more process, and there is going to be that ripple effect. And if you haven't considered sufficient stakeholders, haven't talked to enough people, you are going to have more unintended consequences, which again can affect the success of your change as you go through. Okay. Yeah, it's a wiggly world. So I will jump back. So that's the analysis framework. I use that. And again, it's just helps me to think about these three big chunks of work so that I can decompose, deconstruct as I've jumped in. So if I'm looking at process, it helps me jump into that. And I was starting to just talk about mind mapping. This is a technique, but I also think of it as a tool. I use this frequently in many, regardless of the hat that I'm wearing, the role or responsibility that I have, it's visual. So this is another one where it's a picture. And it was developed in the 70s in the UK by a fellow named Tony Buzan to help learn about a topic. So he was in school and university and it's like, I don't know this topic, what do I do? It's not intended to be an ordered list. It's not intended to be structured. It's intended to have color. It's intended to have visuals so that people can connect to what is being presented to them. I like this as a tool, and I will use it at the beginning. What do you think about this? If I want to explore, what are your interests in this? What do you think are the impacts? I can use this and draw out and put it on the wall. What do you think the benefits are going to be? So let's draw visually what that is. So again, emphasis on the visual side, just using mind maps. There's tools, digital tools that will let you do this as well. I find it's just the quickest to draw it on a board, hand draw it, and just share the picture with people as I go. Just makes it a little bit more straightforward. So that's a mind map. And mind mapping, you can use anywhere where you're brainstorming, really. So whether that's at the beginning of a change initiative, neutral zone, whatever it is that you're looking at. So you get to explore it. The central idea, just put that at the middle, and then just have people come up with ideas. There's a main branch. So in here you can see what I learned camping this summer. There's animals and there's a campsite, there's clothing, there's flowers and animals. Oh, there's big animals. And then there's littler animals. So they have different things. And again, this is great for engaging with your stakeholders. So it's a method of communication, collecting information from them. So that's a mind map. That's my number 5 tool that I use lots. So just to kind of close off, I think I mentioned this earlier, the last tool is you. It's really, really you. You are the most flexible, the most versatile, adaptable tool in your toolkit. You have the skills, and even if you don't have the present skills on a particular tool, you can learn, and that's what's so great. So always with change management, and if you're filling that role of change management, and somebody said it earlier, it's about be curious, ask questions, listening is really, really important. Looking at people when they listen and responding to how they're presenting to you, learning their language, so important with change as well. That's your common ground. Like, we're human, so we have one common ground right off the bat, but also that you start to learn the words that are used in their organization, because I'm talking about this more from a work perspective. If you like a credit union, they don't have clients, they have members, right? So it's, again, you switch and you start to learn very quickly. And once you're using that language, you have stronger trust, you have a stronger relationship with those folks that are going through change, and you're more likely to learn more. So again, that ready, willing, and able to implement it comes forward. Just the one thing to remember is that there is ambiguity. There's change on top of change on top of change. And sometimes people don't know what the answers are. You will get answers. So things will come. And so you have to live with that ambiguity and be happy with it. So kind of closing off, just talking about maintaining your toolkit. I said you're the most important. So make sure you're always taking care of you. And so that truly, and this is really important, I think sort of the last couple of years I've highlighted this for many people, is that we need sleep and we need water and we need food to take care of our physical selves, and we need to take care of our mental health too, right? Or how we our emotional and cognitive self. So ask questions, explore, learn, relax, time. So that's you, part of your toolkit. For the other items in your toolkit, you need to review what those tools are. Have you used them recently? Do you want to use them? Maybe you need to toss them out of your toolkit. Maybe your toolkit is so bulging full, it's like, poof, get rid of that stuff. For those other tools that are in your toolkit, maybe you can practice with them. I always recommend practicing. Try things out before you actually have to use them, even if it's with your dog. Like, they're very good audiences, I just have to say. So polish, recertify if you need to recertify. It's so amazing once you go through and it's like, wait, I don't remember what this topic is. Or taking, walking through an exercise of trying to do something like a force field analysis, for example. I can explain that, but it's like, wait, how do I actually do this? Makes your tools sharp. I talked about my garden shed, the things that I have in my garden shed. And some of those tools there, I don't think I could use them. And I should do something with them and so that someone could use them. But those other tools that I use on a regular basis, clean them with bleach, my secateurs, and they're good to go for another season. So you do have to keep looking at your toolkit and taking care of your toolkit so that they don't just take care of themselves. So we whistled through just some tools, and again, just a little reflective moment. So you had the moment at the beginning, and so now this is it again. What would you say are the top 5 tools in your toolkit? I pick 5 just because it's an arbitrary number. I find it's difficult if somebody says, what's the number 1? It's like, well, these are the 5 that I use most often. So think about that. So what would be the top 5 tools in your toolkit? And if you want to put something in chat, that's okay too. But it is always good. Again, reflective is important. And you might say, well, this is the top tool. And then it's like, but wait, when was the last time I ever did that? So it kind of gives you that chance to do an inventory on what you've got. So just some closing thoughts. We're going to run out of time. Tailoring your tools. Always the change that you've got, I mentioned it earlier, John Cotter, and this, if you've been through one change, you've been through one change. You're always tailoring the tool to fit the change and the organization and your stakeholders. So there's organizational culture, there's the stakeholders, and then there's the change itself. So whatever it is that you're doing. So not every tool works for every change. Maybe it will if you tailor it. So think about that. So everything is unique. So it's all about people, right? Because we're human. And that there is always a bigger picture. And I think that there is always unintended consequences. Things happen. And you are fitting in to an existing system. So there's something on either side that's going on there. The change is going to change. So what you start with, if you're lucky enough to start in the beginning, how you end up with is going to be a little bit different from what was initially envisioned in that business case or those first sponsor meetings. Be okay with assumptions and be okay with ambiguity. I'm just saying be okay. It doesn't mean you have to live with it forever because you're not going to know everything all the time. By asking questions, you will learn what you need to know. And so you'll get answers and you will get clarity. But everything isn't going to be clear at the beginning. And that's where sometimes making assumptions as well as accepting that you don't know, but you'll find out next week. That's okay. Kind of my last thought, don't do more work than you have to. Time is precious. There's time where you should spend time and effort, do that. But if it's about filling out, making sure that you checklist, check, and you put the date on it and it's filed, it's like, just be careful with your time. It is really precious. So that's it. That's all I have on talking about tools. I hope that was helpful. I'm quite sure this information is all to be shared after the presentation. This material, as I mentioned, is part of the leadership development, professional development certificate that McEwen offers. And this is the schedule that is for the winter term. And the idea is that with these courses, you're able to get through them in one term. So you can see some of them are in person and some of them are online. When it has those 2 dates, that's because it's 2 half days. And specifically these, what we talked about today, pulled out of Leading People Through Change, Change Management Fundamentals. And then there's another course actually that's it's not part of this certificate program. It's about evaluating change. So that was us for today. And I think I'm at 5 minutes. So if anybody, I think that's my last slide. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.